So we're really able to sort of sort out a picture of what's going on in the world, and that's helping us, work in several cases with city governments and national governments to help them sort of identify the skills gaps, for instance, in their city or in their country, to figure out where they need to invest in their education policy to create opportunity for their people. Or in the case of our editorial team, it's helping us tell really powerful stories about what's going on in the world. And I think that's something that we can pretty uniquely do at LinkedIn. As a newsroom, we're not trying to do everything, that a much larger newsroom like The Guardian or the New York Times would be able to do, but we're trying to see where we can add value with what we can uniquely do.
Hello, and welcome to Freelance Pod. My name's Suchandrika Chakrabarti, and I'll be your host. Freelance Pod is all about how the internet has revolutionised work. Each week, I'll speak to someone working in a creative field and ask them how their industry has moved from an analogue to a digital age, or how the internet has invented their job. If you like what we're talking about in the podcast, please do get involved on social. You can find Freelance Pod on Instagram as @freelancepod, on Twitter as @freelance_pod_. There's a Facebook group called Freelance Pod, and you can also sign up for the newsletter. The URL is in the show notes. Don't forget that the success of this podcast relies on you, the listeners. If you do enjoy it, please do rate, review and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, also known as iTunes. This means that other listeners will find out that this podcast exists and they'll come and join us too. So on to this episode's guest. Isabelle Roughol is Senior Editor at LinkedIn. She joined the company back in 2012, and she's built a global news team working in 7 languages across Europe, Latin America, Asia and Australia. She has 2 columns. One's called The Last Globalist, and it's about living an open life in a world that's shutting down. She also has a video column, Media in 60 Seconds, and that goes out every week, and it's about the media industry. Her last episode was about visiting the Dublin LinkedIn offices. Isabelle got her start in journalism in newspapers. She received a Bachelor's of Journalism from the University of Missouri, Columbia, and she worked as a reporter and editor at the Columbia Missourian, and then she went on to the Cambodia Daily and then Le Figaro. So Isabelle and I got talking over LinkedIn, possibly because I post a lot of content on there. Just my thinking is it's best practice to put all of your content, written, audio, whatever it is, out on all of your social platforms, particularly as a freelancer when you don't have an organisation to put it on their homepage and push it out for you. And so we got chatting. She kindly shared a piece I wrote about voice and predictions for 2019 and what's going to happen with voice technology. So we have some great advice on how to make the most of your LinkedIn account as a freelancer, how to really tell that story of what you do. Because, that's something I'm really interested in. And I always ask guests on this podcast to say what job title they use when they introduce themselves to people. It's hard to encompass all that we do, maybe in a couple of words. And yet there is that headline at the top of your LinkedIn account. I find myself changing it kind of once a month or so because I feel like I'm adding stuff or maybe paring stuff away from what I'm doing. You may well notice about 30 minutes in that Isabelle and I go from a Skype conversation to actually sitting in the same room, and we'll explain why. But it was really kind of Isabelle to invite me to LinkedIn's new Farringdon offices. They're actually in the building the Guardian newspaper used to be in before the Guardian moved to King's Place. And I used to work in that building back in 2006-07. So my first kind of real part-time job in journalism was uploading the Guardian and the Observer newspapers to the websites, which were called Guardian Unlimited and Observer Unlimited, while I was pursuing an NCTJ in newspaper journalism around the corner from there. So it was really nice to go back. It was really nostalgic. So thanks to Isabelle for inviting me over and for giving me so much of her time and expertise. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and here we go.
So I'm Isabelle Roughol. I'm a senior editor at large at LinkedIn. I am a French citizen in London, I've been here for 2.5 years. I got my contract to move to London on the day of the Brexit referendum.
Oh.
And so I don't sound very French because I learned my English in America. I was an exchange student in high school, and that kind of started my love affair with the English language. So as a journalist, I've really mostly worked in English, far more than in French. I went to university in Missouri, at the University of Missouri Columbia, which has the oldest journalism school in the United States, at least, and learned there to be originally a newspaper reporter with ambitions to be a foreign correspondent. Graduated in 2008, which was the worst possible time to graduate in journalism because you had the double whammy of kind of started the acceleration that was happening in American newsrooms, at least, where you had 10 years of just total nosedive. And, the subprime crisis, which started just a bit before I graduated and which went into then the global financial crisis, which was a couple months after I graduated. So that was just a rather terrible time to be starting a career. But somehow I figured it out. I worked in Cambodia for a little while as a foreign reporter, and then I moved home to France, worked at Le Figaro, which is a big national daily in Paris, and then landed at LinkedIn in 2012 in the Paris office. And I've worked in the Paris office, then moved to the Sydney, Australia office, and finally London for the past 2.5 years.
And how have you found that transition from working in newsrooms to working in kind of the newsroom of a platform, I suppose?
It's kind of hard to remember because I've been here 7 years and it just feels absolutely normal now. But trying to put myself back in the shoes of, being a 27-year-old newspaper reporter when I got here, very, very different in terms of culture. I always say the wonderful thing about moving from newspapers to tech is that the tone, the mood, the ambiance kind of shifts, right? From newspapers circa 2011, where it was very much a doom and gloom, our jobs are disappearing, newsrooms are getting slashed and all of that. And that was, what people were discussing. And then you arrive in Silicon Valley in 2012. It's maybe a bit different now, but, very boisterous, the future is a good thing, people are excited for the opportunities, for what they get to build, the jobs they get to do, and the mission that they're serving. So it's a very, very different vibe, very different culture, from the cynical news reporter, or skeptical at least, to the very optimistic tech worker. So culturally, that was a really interesting shift.
I really agree with you with that, because I started in 2006. As I mentioned, I sort of started uploading the paper from the Guardian onto the website, which is called Guardian Limited back then. And I was made redundant from a job at Associated Press. So I think it's not surprising maybe an American company made me redundant first. So that was in 2010. And then from 2010 to now, I've been made redundant 3 times in, 8 years, because it was last year. And it's kind of worked out okay for me, but I do wonder what it does to younger reporters than me, who almost face a worse situation, don't even get those staffroom jobs. And psychologically, I think it's not helpful to come into an industry where you're being told all these negative things. And then, as you've mentioned, the tech industry, it feels like kind of the sky's the limit. And that's so incredible to take editorial skills then into that environment.
Yeah. And I had the same experience, where at Le Figaro, I was actually on a succession of short-term contracts, which under French law, you can only renew so many times, and then you need to either make the person permanent staff or let them go. There was no question, as much as I think my manager appreciated me, there was no question of making me permanent because they had just cut newsroom positions. They cut the newsroom again after I left, and it's, half the people I knew there have gone. So, I had experience too at 27 years old, barely, not even 3 years into my career, that I was seeing the doors closing just as they were barely opening. And it was a tough time. It was, it was a few months of freelancing and trying to figure out what I wanted to do, but I didn't know enough yet, either about journalism or about building a career or about myself to really make a serious go of it as a freelancer and know what I was doing. I think I would come at it with a very different perspective now with the benefit of time and of the experience that I've had.
What do you think you might have told your younger self with what you know now?
To be far more entrepreneurial. Yeah. I think that's something I really learned in tech is, coming at things within a very entrepreneurial mindset, of trying and testing and getting the data and then learning from that and trying things and moving on quickly if they don't work out. Also learning things like, really as a freelancer, I think you're essentially running a business, right? You're running a business of one, which maybe is obvious to a lot of your audience who are freelancers. But I think if you come at it, and especially if you don't come at it by choice, if you come at it by circumstances, you don't necessarily think about those things. How do I sell myself and my business of one? What's my brand? What do I write? Rather than going after every idea that pops into your mind and every customer who's kind enough to want to buy a couple pages off you, what's your strategy? Is something that I think hardly occurred to me when I was 27. That I think I would look at very differently today.
I think also, back then we were just in the infancy of that kind of who do you appear to be online? Because LinkedIn would have been.
It was launched. It's one of the earliest social media platforms that still exist today. It was launched in 2003, so we just celebrated our 15th anniversary. So I remember I created my account when I was in university, so it would be around 2007. I created my account because I was starting to think about my job search post graduation. But it was, as you said, it was a much smaller platform, and it wasn't necessarily something that people were used to, the thinking of how they present themselves online and how they sort of having a personal brand, as much as I don't like that word.
So yeah, could you tell me about how that LinkedIn kind of newsroom or editorial team built up over the years? We used kind of person number one in editorial.
I wasn't number one. I was number, 3 or 4, but pretty early on. So back in 2011, the first hire was my boss, our editor-in-chief, Dan Roth, who came over from Fortune, and really was hired to start building that editorial initiative at LinkedIn. Made his first couple hires, and then I was third one, I think, a few months later. It's really started a sense that careers were changing, that you needed to invest really in your career on an ongoing basis, that it wasn't just about, searching for a new job every 3 or 5 years, but as we were just talking about, you're really building a reputation as a professional. And because our world is getting bigger and bigger, your reputation is not just word of mouth anymore. It does need to have a digital presence, and that, the profile is one thing, but really the content that you're going to be sharing, creating, interacting with says a lot about who you are, the things that you're interested in, the skills that you have, the way you're thinking about your profession, about your industry. And it also helps you stay on top of what's going on, right? Like, you need to be aware of new trends and developments, things that are happening in the world at large and in your industry or in your company in particular. They're going to help you be a better informed professional and therefore be better at what you do and kind of stay on top of your game, where we know that technologies are changing increasingly quickly. You can't just, learn a job when you're 22 and be done, right? It's just, things don't work that way anymore. So it made a lot of sense for a professional networking site to include, content as well. So that was really the impetus. And it started with simply sort of curating news from third-party publishers. And then we just kind of added on more and more layers over time, so that we started offering a select number of people a publishing platform that was LinkedIn Influencer. We then opened up that publishing platform to all members of LinkedIn so that anyone can publish on the platform. And then we moved to more short form content and video, but always with that same idea that we could empower people to share their expertise and to learn from each other, to give help and to get help from their professional community, and to make connections that would be valuable to their professional lives through the sharing of knowledge and of information. So that was kind of always the idea. We're really focused on conversations, on getting people talking to each other, and on getting that information sort of firsthand from the professionals who are on the ground working in that particular field. And as far as the growth of the team, the part that I had the most to do with was our international expansion. So when we started out, I actually started originally on a little French pilot. That's why I was based in Paris in 2012. We eventually moved on from that, and I worked more and more on the English product. Always had in mind that, our mission is to serve every member of the global workforce. So it should not just be restricted to English or to US content. We really should broaden this out and go to more and more people. So I was able from 2015, I believe. Yeah, 2015 to start really growing the team to other countries and to other languages. To India was our first destination, and we grew to France and Germany and Brazil, the UK, Australia, China, and Japan. I think that's all of them, and Canada and Mexico. There you go. That's all of them. And so kind of grew the team, from a couple people to today, more than 50 journalists who are more than half of them outside the US. At LinkedIn, because it has a very strong corporate culture. Well, first I heard the word culture for the first time. And then it, as a company, is very thoughtful about management and about how we work. Obviously, by virtue of what we do, we're kind of at the forefront of that reflection around how work is organized today. But there is a lot of individual freedom and initiative to, do your work the best way you see fit. We have a sense of the goal, right, and where we're trying to get to. But how you get there, that's really up to you. It's very much about a community. We talk about active communities, which is, people who are talking to each other, learning from each other, giving help to others in their professional community, getting help from them, whether that's, helping them prepare for an interview or understanding what's going on in an industry or for this project that they want to launch. It's really great to see. And I know for the past 7 years, obviously, it's been a rather huge part of my life, and I'm on LinkedIn hours and hours every day, and I have quite a big community around me, and it's a very supportive and positive community, which I find very, very precious.
Can you tell me a bit about the economic graph that LinkedIn has and what you've learned from that, and any stories you've got from that?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So the economic graph is really kind of the mapping of the world, the working world and the world economy that we're able to do thanks to LinkedIn data, right? So you have 6 nodes on the graph, which I'm going to try to remember all 6, but I always forget one. Professionals, companies, schools, jobs, skills, and there you go. I'm missing the 6th one. And learnings and content. And essentially, able to understand what's going on in the global economy as much as it's represented on LinkedIn thanks to what we're seeing in the data. And we have a whole team of data scientists and economists who are kind of parsing this to understand what's happening. So we publish a monthly workforce report. So there's in the US, there's one in the UK as well, and there's one in India, where we're able to show, how hiring is growing. We're able to show talent shortages or growth. We're able to show migration. So, for instance, in the UK after Brexit, we're able to see our professionals leaving the country, or is the country still able to attract global professionals? What industries are growing? Recently, we had some research around sort of what industries are British graduates going into. So we're really able to sort of sort out a picture of what's going on in the world, and that's helping us, work in several cases with city governments and national governments to help them sort of identify the skills gaps, for instance, in their city or in their country, to figure out where they need to invest in their education policy to create opportunity for their people. Or in the case of our editorial team, it's helping us tell really powerful stories about what's going on in the world. And I think that's something that we can pretty uniquely do at LinkedIn. As a newsroom, we're not trying to do everything, that a much larger newsroom like The Guardian or the New York Times would be able to do, but we're trying to see where we can add value with what we can uniquely do.
So I feel like this is kind of really taking audience first journalism to a kind of higher plane, because you've always had people joining the site and adding their data, and then it was really a case of bringing the editorial team on and looking at this data and thinking, what stories can we tell? Right.
It is absolutely everything we do is audience first. The first value of LinkedIn as a company is members first. So always thinking about how does it serve our members? How does it help them understand the world, be more successful professionals, feel, equipped to handle a working world that is changing very quickly and abruptly for some. I think for all of us, really. And so we measure our success as a team by the conversations that we create on the platform. It is very much community-driven journalism. We are, present and visible on the platform, and we're able to post as we're creating stories. We're able to get people's input. Like when I was writing that persuasion story I mentioned earlier, I I posted about it and asked members, who's someone that you think is very persuasive, and why is it? So we're able to kind of like source some of the information. Also ask people what they want us to uncover or to write about. I posted this week. I'm thinking about sort of how we could do more climate and environment coverage. And so I just asked members, hey, what are you interested in knowing? What would be helpful to you as professionals? And we really measure our success by those conversations that we're either able to start ourselves, but also just curate and cultivate. It doesn't, the editors are part of the community. They don't stand sort of separate from it or above it. We're just there to kind of stir the pot and get things started and try to surface the most helpful things for the rest of the community.
I sort of got into journalism for the writing and the interviewing, which I love. And I've always looked at kind of any path, any sort of professional path. I thought, well, I don't really love editing that much, and I don't sort of know where I go. And so freelancing kind of works for me. But it seems like you've kind of got this really great situation where you can stay part of a company, but move back into creating the content. What has that been like? Are you enjoying it? How does it work?
Yeah, I think for me it's slightly different from you because I love all of it, and the hard part is choosing. But I spent years kind of growing projects. I was an editor. I was really a manager. I went from a team of 5 people to a team of 25 people in a span of about a year, less than a year. So I had to hire all of them, train them, get them onboarded. And so that, that work taught me a lot. And I adored my team, but I saw myself doing less and less creating. And after a while, I really had a hunger to get back to it. I also realized that I had been leading our international development for, 5 years, something like that, and that I kind of given it all that I could, and that it probably would be helpful to bring some fresh vision to it, to make sure that I got out of the way and let other brilliant people on my team step up and seize the opportunities. So that was a lot of good reasons to try to move on to other things, while I didn't want to leave LinkedIn because it's a great company, and I felt like I still had something to contribute. So luckily we have a great boss. I'm not saying that because he's going to listen to this, but it's true. Who, is open to my coming up with crazy ideas and being like, how about we do this now? As long as you can justify it for the business. He says, why not? So that's what we did. And I went into an editor or senior editor at large role, where essentially I am writing and creating and sort of sparking conversations on the platform and leading a few, projects here and there wherever I can. But now it's been 2-3 months, and I'm kind of getting into the groove of things. Ideas are coming back. I have way fewer meetings than I used to. I think that's the big thing with creativity, is it requires large amounts of time with nothing on, which could never happen when I was running a team. So I'm having ideas again. I'm really loving writing. I'm an introvert, so interviewing part was hard to get back into. But now I'm finding that I really love talking to people and learning what they're working on and what they're doing. I mean, that's the incredible privilege of our profession, right? Is we get to ask really anyone anything. In the world of work, I mean, there's just get to ask people what they do, what they're working on in fields that you know nothing about. It's fascinating. I interviewed a few days ago the 2 lead scientists working on IBM Project Debater, which is they're building AI that can have a debate with a human, that can make arguments, and understanding kind of how that works and how they parse that in a machine. That was fascinating. It's conversations like that is, I get paid to do this. It's great.
Yeah, like I chose the lens of work for the podcast, partly because as a freelancer, I was like, how does everyone else do this? But it's genuinely really interesting because people do much more than they ever used to, I think, bring the personal to work. And like you see on LinkedIn, you read the tone in which someone writes their summary and writes about their positions, and if they're writing content, that too. And, the personal and the professional, I think, have become much more tightly bound together. And particularly in the jobs we do as well, it's part of that. We need a new word for brand, but it's really important to bring that personality and also voice stuff, because you can read so much about a person from their voice.
Yes, we talk about at LinkedIn, we talk about bringing your whole self to work, which is more and more. Yeah, people come to the office as individuals, not just as task performers. They're full human beings. Which was always the case, but you tended to, put on the suit and leave your personality or your personal issues or hopes and dreams kind of at the door and pick them up again at 5 p.m. And I think that's just not how the world of work works anymore. And the things that interest you and that move you in your personal life also enrich your professional life and your work. It all goes together. I think obviously it's a bit easier for us in creative professions, because if I don't use my personal experiences in my writing, I have nothing. I put a lot of myself in my writing.
I really like what you had to say about creativity needs periods of like not being scheduled fully. Can you expand on that bit? Because you're completely right. I'm finding that as a freelancer, and it's lovely to be feeling creative. Other stuff gets in the way.
Yeah, and I think it's the challenge that we all have today in a hyper-connected world, is to allow ourselves moments of boredom even, or moments of nothingness. Our CEO I remember a while back wrote about his technique, which is literally blocking out thinking time in his calendar, a couple hours every now and then where no one can put a meeting. And this is a CEO, right? So he's got something every 10 minutes on his calendar for months to come. But every once in a while, there's a 2-hour break to give him time to, think the big picture, which is, what the job of CEO is. And my own humble, much more humble level, it's about, I try to continue writing and creating while I was a manager, but I found that didn't quite work because, if I got an hour with nothing and my brain was like, the wheels were starting to turn, and then bam, you're interrupted and you have a meeting, and getting back into it is it's just really not efficient. So now I'm able to block entire days where today, I'm thinking, I'm writing. And when I say today I'm writing, is in most cases, I will spend hours staring at my screen and nothing is coming out until, the idea finally strikes. I'm a late evening writer. I'm kind of useless during the day, but like from 5 p.m. things really, really happen. Last night I was writing at 10 p.m. because the idea had finally come after I had been thinking about it all day. And that's just what creativity is, right? It doesn't work on a schedule. We have a saying for that in French. Ce qui se pense bien s'énonce clairement. What is well thought out is well said. If you can't find the words to express something, the thinking part isn't done. The words will come when the thinking is finished. I love that saying.
Should we just have a quick, because it will sound different on the podcast. Yeah. Should we just give a bit of background as to why we're in the office?
So we got interrupted in the first half of this conversation. Someone waving their arms frantically at me outside of the recording booth I was in, talking to you over Skype. Turns out there was a fire alarm test in the building that we just moved here in Farringdon last week. And so, unfortunately, I was asked to end our conversation abruptly and leave the building, which was not on fire. It was absolutely a drill. But it's great because it gave us the opportunity to meet in person, for you to come in and check out our new digs.
Yeah, they're really nice.
Meet in person, yeah.
It's the old Guardian building, and I used to do shifts here back in 2006 to 2007, which makes me sound really old. And I think you've done a beautiful job with it, you personally, obviously, because you redid it. It's really light, and it's got great views, and our workplace team did a fantastic job. It's a very inspiring place to work. The room we were just in over there, there's views of the gherkin, and
you can view there's outdoor space, there's natural light. You can view the gherkin and the shard, and it's pretty cool.
I'm not envious at all. My office is next door to my bedroom. So,
that's the best commute, though.
So the bits that we kind of missed off, I suppose, tips for freelancers and how they can make the most of their profile on LinkedIn, and then also the reason we kind of got chatting was I incessantly post content to LinkedIn. I guess it's always an experiment and see what's working and what isn't. And I feel like you're interested in podcasts yourself. And I feel like there's a big movement in terms of voice tech and podcasts and stuff like that. So I guess I just write stuff that I've learned about podcasting. I put the podcast up and it got us talking. So I wonder if it's helpful for other freelancers to know that they should be posting content and what might work.
Absolutely. So there's a lot to unpack there. First, obviously, the building block of your LinkedIn presence is your profile, right? So you want a profile that, tells the world who you are professionally, with an impactful headline, especially, and, kind of a list of your your different positions over time and your achievements. And obviously, as a freelancer, you want to make sure that you include, the various publications that you've written and published for, the links to some of your best content. That could be your video reel if you're a broadcast person, or your audio reel for an audio person. So that's kind of like step one. And I would say making sure that your profile really showcases who you are. Don't be afraid to have a little personality in it. I think, we're not just people in suits anymore as professionals. We're kind of bringing our whole selves to work, is how we like to put it here. So just making sure that it's real. And I think especially for freelancers, trying to figure out like what differentiates you, what's your niche. Like you're the voice person, right? Like that's your area. And for someone, they might be, a climate change reporter, or they might be, doing other things. So making sure that you're highlighting that. But that's obviously, the first building block. Then it's about your presence on the platform over time, and that what you're doing through content, obviously. So, the obvious things are sharing the work that you're publishing elsewhere, making sure that you're sharing those links, that you're giving your network an opportunity to see your work. And we were talking about this a bit offline earlier. There's some people think that's bragging, And I think, no, that's just showcasing your work. I mean, we're all publishing out there. We're already bragging. We're putting our names out on stories, But it's really, I think about this as helping the community by showcasing what you've done, what you've learned, and how it can be helpful to others. And I think that's a much better mindset to have, because then you're really, participating in a community as opposed to just broadcasting out what you do. And so making sure that you're sharing those articles. We're seeing journalists use the platform very effectively to kind of continue the conversations on the things that they're publishing besides. So it's getting feedback from people in the field that they're covering. In a lot of cases, it leads to follow-up stories because people are, raising something that maybe you didn't know about, or asking a question that is worth a follow-up story, or that's how you get new sources or new ideas. So that's really valuable. I think it's also really important to think about this as a conversation and not broadcasting, right? It's not just one to many. It's many to many. It's kind of all the nods in the community connecting to each other. So sharing out your content, but also participating in the conversations happening through the content that others in your network are sharing, making sure that you're following the people that you're interested in, and the institutions that you're interested in, the companies, the media outlets, and conversing. And that's how we met, right?
In a comment section.
It's in a comment section. There's so many people that I've met through comment sections, right? And that's the beauty of the platform, I think.
Do you think that people are bringing like an honest kind of like a mindset of we've got to keep learning in a digital age?
It very much so. I think it's, the professional context helps, right? People are putting their professional identity on the line. Their bosses are watching, their customers are watching. And so that, kind of helps keep things healthy. And then I think it's a very positive platform where people are really genuine and interested in giving help and getting help. I use it. I love how it's kind of breaking down barriers, as opposed to the old-fashioned way of kind of journalists sort of sending the word from on up, like, here's the story, this is what you need to know. I use it a lot before I start reporting a story, or I might do a little bit of research and be like, hey, I'm thinking of writing about this. Like, what are angles that interest you? How should I approach this? Tell me something I don't know that I should look into, or a question that I can research on your behalf and help answer. And that's very much how the LinkedIn editors operate. We're just among the community and just trying to serve as conduits and as aids to the conversation, as opposed to, kind of sitting above it. That, I think, helps build trust, helps with transparency. We know that's a huge issue in media at the moment. I think I think it's something that every journalist, freelancers or within institutions, we're seeing a lot of journalists, at those major media institutions use the platform in the same way, and kind of giving people a behind the scene look into how they put their stories together, that I think is really valuable.
So we're looking at maybe LinkedIn for news gathering. Maybe that's an avenue towards finding stories. Have you found that for yourself when you've been writing content for LinkedIn?
Yeah,
you sort of crowdsource a bit.
Absolutely. So, just in the past couple example, I published a story about persuasion, which our data showed is one of the most needed skills in the workplace, and then one of the biggest sort of skills gap among soft skills. And I thought that was intriguing, and I kind of asked people on the platform, hey, who's someone that you know who's very persuasive, and kind of trying to open the conversation. And I found actually in a lot of the comments, people are like, well, why are you, encouraging this skill? Like, this is manipulation, this is evil, like, it is an unethical way of doing business. And I was like, oh, wait, that's interesting. This skill that all the employers say they need, all these people think it has a terrible reputation and it shouldn't be. And, that ended up being my story. And I, kind of looked into that.
But in a digital age, you kind of don't exist if you're not putting your stuff online. I don't think we can wait for people to come and find us anymore because everyone's there.
Yeah, well, and if they're trying to find you, well, if you're putting your content out there and they search for your name, they're not going to find anything.
Yeah.
So you do have to put it out there, and it's just being part of a conversation, and our content as journalists is public, and we should be too, a little bit, especially, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to share all of your personal life. Yeah. That's not the point. But I think breaking down those barriers and having the audience, the people formerly known as the audience, the community really have a chance to exchange with you is really important. And as a freelancer, every freelancer knows, they have to sell their work. You can do the best writing in the world, the best reporting in the world. If you don't have anyone to publish it, if you don't have anyone to pay you for it, that's not a lasting business model, is it? So you do need to be out there in a smart way.
I really like the idea of showing people who might not be in journalism how stories are made. So I do think the process of making media is really opaque.
And as a media leader, especially if you aspire to be that, you need to have the business acumen, you need to have the management skill, you need to have product vision and strategy for your company, for your product, for your industry as well. And then you need to have, the good old-fashioned journalism skills of reporting and writing and being able to identify a story and get to the heart of it. And you, I think in your career, kind of have to constantly go from one to the other to keep both that set of skills really fresh. And also to not get bored.
I was going to say that, yeah, I think that's kind of the senior level journalism jobs of the future. You kind of go from one to the other.
Yeah. And you need, and we were talking about visibility earlier. I think you need to have a level of byline recognition as well as, genuine business experience and know what you're talking about when you're talking about strategies, when you're talking about business models, when you're talking about building a team and hiring people and managing people in this very challenging industry. So I wanted to make sure that I had both experience. Writing about it was making sense of it for myself, making sense of it for my team. It was very emotional to kind of decide not to be their manager anymore. I hired every single one of those people, and they're absolutely brilliant. I'm very attached, as a manager before, as a friend now, to that team. So I just wanted to make sure that they understood the reasons, that they understood that I was also doing this because I saw opportunities for them. One thing that I think is really important is for people in senior roles not to stay glued in their chair for too long because you're blocking opportunities for other people to rise. And I felt like there was a lot of talent, that team that was ready, and that they didn't need me as much as they thought they did. And so that was kind of a bit of all of that going into the writing. And also, again, we talked about this before, but transparency. There's a lot of people who, for reasons that are their own, decided to follow me on LinkedIn, and I want to make sure that, when the words on my profile change, people understand where that's coming from.
Yeah.
You own the narrative of your career. If, you have a profile or resume where you go from managing a global team to being alone in your corner writing, some people might think, oh, what happened here? Did she lose a job? You want to make sure that you are explaining your choices and that someone who has a question about what's happening in your career has an answer that makes sense, and that, our careers are stories as well, and that we need to tell them, we need to own those stories.
So thanks Isabelle Roughol for guesting on the podcast and sharing all of her knowledge about how LinkedIn can really work for freelancers.
Well, that's it for another episode of Freelance Pod. If you enjoyed what we talked about in this episode, please do get involved on social. You can find Freelance Pod on Instagram as @freelancepod, on Twitter as @freelance_pod_. There's a Facebook group called Freelance Pod, and you can also sign up for the newsletter. The URL is in the show notes. Don't forget that the success of this podcast relies on you, the listeners. If you do enjoy it, please do rate, review and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, also known as iTunes. This means that other listeners will find out that this podcast exists and they'll come and join us too. That's it for now. Speak to you again soon. Goodbye.